Cindy Sherman is one of the most prominent artists of the third wave of feminism who still works today. And she makes photographs of herself that parody the cliches of femininity and really seek to deconstruct the nature of reality, the nature of gender, and the oppressive manipulation of mass media. Her early photographs are done in black and white, and she is the figure in all of these where she assumes stereotypical guises of, the housewife, the beach bunny, the vamp, the working girl. What's interesting, I think, is, in a way they're self-portraits, but they tell us nothing about who Cindy Sherman is. Similarly, these are some of her most recent works. These are her Instagram selfies of recent years, where again, she is always the subject, but she remains elusive. I think what she's trying to reveal to us is that feminine identity is a kind of masquerade. And there's no essential notion of timeless femininity, but identity is always constructed. I think this is another goal of postmodernism, that there's nothing that is set in stone. There's nothing that is essential or timeless, but everything is constructed. In a way, this is very similar to the work of the Dada artist Hannah Herch, who also wanted to deconstruct images of women and images of femininity that she saw in mass media. We're going to move on to kind of a related category here when we think about identity politics and the culture wars of this conservative era of the 1980s and then moving into the 1990s. We're going to start with James Luna's artifact piece, a performance by Native American artist Luna, who challenged the way contemporary American culture and museums have presented his culture as essentially extinct and vanished. So in this performance piece, Luna installs himself in an exhibition case in the San Diego Museum of Man, in the section on the Kumeyaay Indians who once inhabited San Diego County. In doing so, he critiques the representation of American Indians by museums and other institutions that systematically objectify and romanticize Native people, either as living in the past or altogether vanished. Luna poses himself amongst exhibitions with, pottery, projectiles, mannequins, and props. Here he is living and breathing, dressed only in a leather cloth, with labels around him as if he is an artifact, pointing out scars from past wounds. There's various personal items that he includes in a case that, have things like political buttons, college diplomas, divorce papers, recordings of Jimi Hendrix and the Rolling Stones, all of these objects that speak to a living, developing culture. As Luna explained in a 2008 interview, I had long looked at representation of our peoples in museums, and they all dwelled in the past. They were so one-sided. We were simply objects among bones, bones among objects, and then signed and sealed with a date. Another important episode in the culture wars of the 80s takes us back to minimalism and the work of Richard Serra. So this installation in a public square in New York City, Tilted Arc, is actually what initiated the culture wars regarding federal funding for the arts. So federal funding for the arts begins back in the 30s with the Works Progress Administration. And in 1965, the National Endowment for the Arts is funded with the notion that public art should represent the public. But of course, the problem is that there's no unitary notion of who the public is and what the shared values of that mythic public are. And Serra's work really challenges this because he puts an imposing piece of steel right across this plaza and it's at this kind of ominous tilt. It looks like it's ready to collapse. Many people, many people criticize this work, saying it was ugly. There was no meaning. There was no context. There were all sorts of judges involved in different hearings. And finally, the work was removed because a judge claimed that thieves and terrorists could hide behind the sculpture. And he said, we just need to put it somewhere else. But for Sarah, he said, to move this work is to destroy it. What does he mean by that? Here he's referencing the importance of site specificity in post-war art, that this can't just go anywhere, but that it responds, it is in conversation and dialogue with the public here and with this public square. Similarly, 20-year-old Maya Lin, who was chosen from hundreds of submissions for the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, she also uses minimalism in a site-specific way for her design of this memorial. She's taking simple granite slabs, plain geometric abstraction from minimalism to create a memorial on the National Mall in Washington, D.C. that almost appears as a scar in the landscape. Compare this to the kind of chauvinistic, bombastic monuments that are across the rest of the mall. Things like the Washington Monument, the more recent World War II monument. Instead, the Vietnam Veterans Memorial is much more contemplative. It's much more somber. The Vietnam War was very contentious. Over 50,000 Americans lost their lives, and this is really a place for mourning, and it's a place for us to really engage in a very personal way. Look at how the reflective surface of the black granite shows us our reflection against the names of all of those who died. And it's important that in that long list of names, they are listed chronologically without their military rank, to say that everybody's equal. Everybody is being recognized on the same level. Now, this was highly controversial for a number of reasons. One reason being that Maya Lin was very young, the attacks were ageist, and the attacks were also racist. Many people said an Asian American, Maya Lin is Chinese American, that an Asian American should not be the one to create this memorial to a war that the United States fought in Asia. And debates, the culture wars escalated so much that a kind of consolation memorial was erected next to Maya Lin's memorial that showed a much more traditional, much more conventional memorial with three naturalistic figures here included in Friedrich Hart's work. I think this really speaks to the idea that there is no such thing as a unified public. We certainly know that today, right? But what I find just as fascinating is that Maya Lin's work is the most visited site on the National Mall today. That this language of minimalism, I think, really draws us in, and this is the visual vocabulary that we see in more recent public memorials as well. Things like the 9/11 memorial at the World Trade Center, various Holocaust memorials in Berlin, the National Memorial for Peace and Justice, also called the National Lynching Memorial in Birmingham, Alabama, that opened 2 years ago. We are drawn to minimalism because of its starkness, because of its austerity.